Hello, this is Chief Judge Janet DeFiore. Over the past few months, the Gender Fairness Committee of the 3rd Judicial District, chaired by former Albany City Court Judge Rachel Kretzer, has produced a documentary about the pioneering women judges of the 7-county 3rd Judicial District. 9 groundbreaking judges were interviewed. May D'Agostino, Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of New York, Catherine Doyle, former surrogate of Albany County, Victoria Graffio, former Judge of the New York Court of Appeals, Helena Heath, Judge of the Albany City Court, Rachel Kretzer, former Judge of the Albany City Criminal Court, Karen Peters, the presiding Justice of the Appellate Division 3rd Department, Beverly Tobin, former Judge of the Albany County Family Court, Mary Work, former surrogate of Ulster County, and Deborah Young, Judge of the Rensselaer County Court. Throughout the month of March, Women's History Month, we will share these interviews through our Amici podcasts. I think you will find the interviews of these trailblazing women to be both enlightening and inspiring.
Welcome to Amici, news and insight from the New York State Judiciary and the Unified Court System. I'm John Carr. Today we have 1 guest and 3 interviewers. Our guest is the Honorable Mary Work, one of the 9 pioneering women judges we interviewed for a documentary produced by the 3rd Judicial District Gender Fairness Committee. During the interview, you will first hear from Dolores Bolden of the Office of Court Administration as she asks Judge Work some questions, before handing off that baton to her colleague Ann Wasilewski. And toward the end, retired Albany City Judge Rachel Kretzer, chair of the Gender Fairness Committee, has a few questions of her own. For more information on the podcast series or the documentary, please contact me at 518-453-8669 or send me a note at jcaher@nycourts.gov. And thanks for listening.
Good afternoon, Judge. I'm Dolores Bolden.
Good afternoon.
All right, let's see. I'm going to start with a series of questions. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. What did inspire you to become a lawyer in the first place?
I guess the earliest thoughts I had of it, I always like to argue. I'm one of 4 children. I had 3 brothers. So, I grew up arguing and or debating, I guess. And then in high school I debated and enjoyed it. And I was unsure as to whether I wanted to be a lawyer or a social worker. And I remember constitutional law. That really inspired me. But I still hadn't made up my mind. Mm-hmm. So I took the law boards and I got all my recommendations in my senior year in college, and I worked for the Department of Social Services in Bedford-Stuyvesant for a year. And after that, I decided I didn't want to be a social worker. I mean, it was just, I felt very frustrated. I couldn't really help people in the way I wanted to. That I could do more as a lawyer. So that was my path.
Thank you. Who are your role models, pretty much, that inspire you to be a judge and also a lawyer as well?
Well, to go to law school, I guess I have to go back. Probably teachers that I had in high school and some of my professors in college, particularly the one who taught me constitutional law. That was an inspiration. Mm-hmm. I spent my junior year at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And there was an American professor there who was transferred from the Midwest, and I remember talking to him about it. And he was so incredibly encouraging, and I sort of had this stereotype that he was going to be conservative and not approve of women, but quite the reverse. And so he encouraged me as well to go. Role models as a judge, in law school, one of my evidence professor was Irving Younger. And he's a great evidence professor. He was terrific on that. But he was also a civil court judge. And I recollect him talking to us about how you behave in court and how the judge should behave in court. And no one sits when they're making an objection, and you don't make long objections. I learned so much from him, an appreciation of the importance of a formality in the court. And he was, of course, in the civil court in New York City, where if you didn't maintain some formality, it was going to be chaos. So I recollect him particularly as a role model. I don't know if I could go into once I finished law school and
yes, please, and also women role models as well too. If there's any
right, yeah, well. Sure, of course. We moved up to. I practiced law in legal services in the Bronx, and there were 6 of us hired at the same time, 3 women and 3 men. And there was one who was, she was my age, but particularly, a role model at that point, because she was from Puerto Rico and she spoke Spanish and English, and we would go into court, and she would go da 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 in Spanish to her client, and then in English, and she was just amazing to watch. So, but that was a pretty male. There were 3 of us, yes, and it really. And the judges, I cannot say. There were 1 or 2 judges, and I can't even bring back their names, in the family court in Manhattan, who were an inspiration. And one of them I recall, I should have looked this up, but one of them I recall talking to us about how she was dealing with her children as well as the bench, and thinking to myself, this can be done. Taking her kids shopping in the shopping cart. I just recall her being a particularly inspiring person. And I've just recalled it now that you've asked, the question has been asked, because some of this gets lost. We moved up to Ulster County, and I had heard about Judge Peters, and her reputation was that she was very tough. Mm-hmm. And I remember going in, having been in the Bronx Family Court and the Manhattan Family Court, or New York County Family Court, for a number of years, and thinking, oh my gosh, this woman is smart. This woman listens, and she's fair, yes, and she doesn't brook much nonsense, but which was fine. So I would certainly say that as a role model for a judge, it was Karen Peters walking into her courtroom and seeing that.
Thank you so much. You attended law school in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, excuse me. What was the law school environment like for women at that point?
All right. I graduated from college in 68, started in 69 there, so I worked that year. NYU started admitting women in 1890. You have to understand their history. They had been admitting women into their law school longer than any other law school, I believe. There was what I would call a critical mass of women in my class. There were enough women so you didn't feel awkward or alone at all. So it was probably atypical, because I've talked to other women who went to law school elsewhere at that time, and it was quite different, but I did not feel it there. And I don't know if this is the time for this. I just have to tell this story about NYU. Shortly after I became a judge, a family court judge in 1990, mm-hmm. I got invited, and Judge Peters got invited. Judge Slobod, who was an Orange County judge, and Judge Kay, all were invited to come down to NYU to celebrate 100 years of women in the judiciary at New York University. And there's a story on this that I just love. I hadn't been there that long, and my secretary wrote the letter to say that we were both coming, and enclosed were our photos, because they wanted photos of both of us. Enclosed, please find the photograph of Judge Peters, Judge Work, class of whatever. So Karen looked at the letter and she said, Mary, they're not going to know which is which. Who's who here? Which one is Judge Peters and which one is Judge Work? So we straightened that out. We went down, but what was particularly moving to me was the number of older women who had been judges. Really, I think the oldest had graduated in the 20s. And had been a judge, and they told different stories. I know you've heard different stories here. Mm-hmm. The ones who came out and became judges in the early 40s, or came out of law school in the 40s, and when the men were at war, right, had a better experience, in terms of at least initially finding jobs. Judge Kay, of course, was there. She graduated from NYU, and she spoke. But what really struck me, and I said this afterwards to people, I said, we were not meeting in a closet. This was a big room. There were a lot of women there who had been judges, and it was a wonderful day. I've never forgotten
Excellent.
It. So.
Excellent. Thank you. Did the professors treat you with respect in law school, or as someone who was just taking up a seat that a man could have?
No, they certainly treated us, I thought, the same. I know that went on in other places and at an earlier time, possibly in NYU, I think it may have, but not when that was not my experience.
Good, good. How did you get your first job with the Bronx Legal Services office?
Okay, well, I wanted to go into legal services, and that came from my experience as a caseworker for the Department of Social Services. I remember watching people get evicted and saying, I'd really like to do something about that. So I wanted to work in legal services or legal aid, so that's where my focus was. We lived in Brooklyn, and there were no openings in Brooklyn, legal services on Court Street. And there was an opening there for Bronx Legal Services. This is interesting. It's for a one-year position leading rent strikes in the South Bronx. They wanted for legal services used to do that. They're not allowed to do that anymore, but they did, and it was a grant. So I went up for the interview, and it was a man, Lorenzo Casanova, wonderful name, who was running the office, and he interviewed me, and he said I seemed fine, and he said, but that's the one time they thought they should have a man, because you would be going out in the night in the dangerous South Bronx, and they thought it'd be better to hire a man. He said, and I think he was pretty straight about that. I knew that's why he wasn't going to hire me. He said, but we're about to hire a number of staff attorneys, and you should come back and for that job. So I did, and that's how I became a staff attorney. And the fellow that got the job, I mean, he ultimately became a staff attorney as well. And the truth is, it was much better because it was a permanent job. It wasn't a grant job. So that's how I started at Bronx Legal Services.
Thank you so much. What was it like for a woman to practice law privately in Wallkill, New York in the late 1980s?
Well, I didn't practice all that long, and I did a fair amount of family court work. I found that I was accepted in the community. There was only one other lawyer there. Wallkill, New York is a tiny little hamlet. And so I was, I did the various real estate, all the sort of wills and all the various things. Yes. But obviously people didn't come to me if they didn't want a woman lawyer. The one person I remember had a concern was he wanted to know how old I was in my 40s because his lawyer had just died. So, so he was concerned to get a young lawyer, younger anyway. So I recollect him as well. But no, I would, I did so many other things. I did so much in family court. At that point, I was doing a lot of law guardian and assigned counsel in family court. And I was doing a fair amount out of my house. I had an office in the house. We had 3 kids. We moved up with a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old. I have 3 sons. And when I opened that office, they were only 5 and 9 and 11. So I practiced in an office. We renovated a whole section of the house, so I practiced from there, and that worked. But it was a long commute. It still is to 45 minutes to Kingston from Wallkill. So. But so I was doing a lot of family court, and I was doing some of the regular small practice in Wallkill. And then my husband moved his office from New York City, and I couldn't have done all of this unless he was there to take care of the kids. Although he was there after school, and he was there.
Yes.
So.
Encounter any gender bias at all in your career, I guess, period?
I've been really trying to think about that, other than because I don't think so. I can't recall. I really can't. I mean, I'm sure that there were, one of the issues I certainly remember was I would see it, and not directed at me, but directed at, one of the things that I was taught early on was to make sure that the attorneys, particularly in a divorce, that the attorney for the husband would have a habit of referring to his client as Mr. Jones and the wife as, Joni or whatever, or Mary, or by her first name. And, so you'd have to call them on that. I can also recall when I had a sanction hearing on an attorney who just flat had not showed up, and he brought his quote-unquote, he referred to her, his girl, who was in her early 60s, and he wanted her to testify as to why he hadn't been there, because she had the nerve to have a family emergency and leave the office. And so he had nobody to remind him, and I wouldn't let her testify. So that business and that's still around, the lawyers calling their staff members, it's not addressed, I don't think, so much to women lawyers as it is to staff people, people that are presumed to be on a lower echelon or whatever. And that was a battle. And the calling by the first names it was another time that I saw it. You certainly see it. Yes, it's just I don't think it's addressed. Well, certainly once you're a judge, they're sort of careful.
Yes.
They're not going to. I mean, the people they used to call me honey or hun, But that was. I mean, they would be, elderly women, and they call me hun, and it's sort of, I never was offended by that because that was just like not even a conscious thing. That was not a put down. That was just, that's how they spoke. So no, not as an attorney, and certainly not in legal services. I didn't encounter that because, there were enough women, and it was just sort of we were all going to save the world, kind of joined together.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Did you endure any sexual harassment at all in your career?
No, I can't recall.
Thank you.
I can remember, and I don't want to quote it, but I remember one meeting with one lawyer when I was a law guardian who, made some sexual. They weren't directed at me, but they were totally inappropriate. Mm-hmm. But that's the one, and I had a clear memory of that, wanting to get out of his office.
Yes, ma'am. Understandably so. Okay, is a judgeship something that you had always inspired to do? I think you pretty much answered that, but
not well. No, what happened? I have to say that I always thought I can remember riding home on the East Side Drive from the Bronx to Brooklyn and pounding on the steering wheel and saying to myself, or sometimes out loud, if that judge had only given me 5 more minutes and been more patient or listened, and just the frustration. And then I came up to find a judge who did that. Mm-hmm. So in Ulster County, and that was like a miracle. So I can remember that, but I became a judge after my predecessor in office died. I don't know if he died truly in office, Judge Feeney. He was getting ready to go to work when he died. So it was totally, so I can't say that I was sitting there waiting for his term to be up or anything else. And certainly Judge Peters had several more years in her term. And I was doing a lot of family court. I did law guarding, then I became the Department of Social Services lawyer, prosecuting abuse and neglect in family court. So, I was doing a lot of that. So when he died, and the governor appoints a replacement till the election. So I applied for the vacancy with 8 others. I was the only woman who applied for the vacancy. Then I got rated well by my bar association, and ultimately I was appointed by Governor Mario Cuomo to fill the vacancy, and then I ended up in a Democratic primary because I really wasn't real well known at the time, and I won that, and then I ran against the Republican and was successful. So that's how I became a judge. Mm-hmm. As far as positioning, I think the question was positioning.
Or aspired to.
But I think really the question for me is, was I prepared to be a family court judge? How? And I was, because when I was a legal services lawyer, I represented parents accused of abusing and neglecting their children. So I had been on the defense side. And then I had been a law guardian, and then I had prosecuted abuse. I had seen the whole range. I really have to say that I knew the law for the family court. And then I sat down with Judge Peters, because even though you've done a lot of it, as I had, you don't see it from the same angle as a judge. And someone had told me that this story, I don't know if it's true or not, about a judge getting on the bench the first day. They call the case, all rise, everybody sits down, and then the judge looks to the clerk and says, "What do I say next?" So I didn't want to be that judge. Right. So I went and I sat down with Judge Peters. She had her little son. He was a baby. Avanti was a baby. Mm-hmm. In her on a weekend with a yellow pad, and we went through every single kind of case there was, starting with, domestic violence and neglect and custody, each article this, article, because it's all in articles in the family court. And so I said, well, Karen, what do you say first? And literally, we went through that. So by the time I took the bench, I didn't have much time because, I had seen it from her perspective, and it is different. Because when you're a lawyer, you pay attention to what you were going to say next. Right. You worry about what the judge is going to say next, but you don't really think about how it's structured. So those are the things I think prepared me to be a judge.
Thank you so much, Judge Work. Appreciate that.
How did you position yourself politically to run for Ulster County Surrogate Court in 1990?
Well, I was sort of an ex post facto positioning, because what happened was I was appointed to fill the vacancy. Mm-hmm. And I did not have, the Democratic Party was split, and they had been a big, I didn't even know about this, but the year before there had been an attempt to replace the party chair. And there was probably, 40% of the Democratic Party that opposed him. I was not his choice. So when I got appointed, by the governor to run, and I ended up running against his choice in the primary, I had a built-in support that I didn't even know I was going to have of all these people that had opposed the chair and were happy to see someone running against his candidate. So that's why I say it was kind of ex post facto. I mean, we had gone to a few political meetings, but I mean, we hadn't been there all that long. And so I certainly wasn't positioning myself to run as a judge. As soon as I, sort of figured out the dynamics of it all, I realized they were the folks I had to go to. And you just go to all the committee meetings and that you can, and meet as many people as you can. And they helped me. They gave me a lot of advice because I really didn't know how to run a campaign. And I found someone who supposedly could do it, but she was never available when we needed her. So ultimately, my husband ran the campaign. He learned it on the fly, but we had a lot of very good advice from a lot of people on how to do it politically, and it's political, because you got to win the election if you're going to be a judge, at least in the county.
You do, yes. So the receptive, for the most part, was positive for you?
Well, it was an interesting issue because, of course, the other judge was a woman, and this is Ulster County. Now, she when she ran, it was, when Karen ran, which was in 1983, it was really tough, and they were just, the same party chair who wouldn't support me had said to her, "But you're a girl." That's what I'm sure she told you that. That's the line. How could you run for judge? So they'd had one, and she was very good, so that helped. So I worried that they would just be, because I was running against a man, that there would be some feeling that they shouldn't have two women in the family court. That was my concern. And one of my favorite stories on this is there was an attorney who was then president of the Bar Association, highly respected. His father, who was, he must have been in his late 70s. He died recently in his 90s. Was highly respected, and I said to this attorney, what do you think? Is this going to be a problem, that there's going to be two women, that I'm going to be a second woman? And he said, I don't know. He said, I'll ask my father. So he comes back and he says to me that this is the attorney. He said, who his father was an attorney. He said, my father said to me that he didn't understand the question. It was a wonderful answer, and I thought, well, if Norman doesn't understand the question, he was of course kidding, but that's ridiculous. He was basically saying to me, that's ridiculous to be worrying about that. So I just sort of went on, and nobody certainly raised it, articulated it to me that it was a problem. I'm sure for some it was.
Okay, no, thank you.
Okay.
So you went from family court judge to surrogate.
Yes.
In 1990.
No, I became the family court judge in 1991. I was actually appointed in 1990. I served for 15 years. Judge Traficante, who was the surrogate in Ulster County. And I was asking about role models. Talking about role models, I learned so much from Judge Traficante as well, because he did a lot of family court work and before I became a judge, and so I appeared before him a lot. So, but when he and he was always a good person for advice. Judge Traficante, as we all know, he's the one who actually convinced me who got me to go to Rochester, New York in February to sit in to help out with their family court. And I went, and Judge Kane, who later went to the appellate division, went, and Judge Traficante used to say that should be said when they were memorializing him, that he convinced two otherwise sane judges to go to Rochester, New York in the dead of winter to sit in the family court. So we did. But anyway, but I digress. So in 2004, I guess it was, when Judge Traficante announced in March. I had thought about it. I had been a judge, I was 15 years in the family court. I loved the family court. I will always say that the family court was the most important work of my life, anything I ever did. But I was getting, it was grueling, and I was just afraid I wasn't going to be as good a judge as I wanted to be there. That was one concern I had. I also wanted to just try something else and do something. And I knew that if I became a surrogate, I would also become an acting Supreme Court justice, because the surrogate just does, and that's what they do in Ulster County. And I wanted that experience. I never really presided over jury trials, and I wanted that experience. So I wanted the experience. I also thought about surrogate's court, and I was right. it's a lot like family court. For all the, there are sometimes their big estates and there are complicated financial issues and estate planning issues, but there are an awful lot of families that are just families in pain, just like in the family court. Stepmothers and children of the husband, second wives, and or siblings, and I did see that a lot in surrogates court. So when I heard that, I came across, on the website for OCA, that Judge Trafficante, and I didn't know that he was. I thought he would retire as Deputy Chief Administrative Judge and just stay on as surrogate. When I saw that he was leaving everything, I called my husband, and really the same day, and I said, Vic, because I can't call on a political. I said, Vic, call the party chair, who's by this time somebody totally different, and tell him that Judge Trafficante is retiring from everything, and I want you to be the first to tell him. Don't wait, call him now, and tell him that I want to run. And which he did. I wanted to get to him because his daughter worked for in the court system. I thought she's going to call him first. But so anyway, and that's when I decided to run. And I had already run for re-election to the family court, and I had also run for Supreme Court and lost in 1994. Was it? And got a lot of help from Rachel and other people in that race, but I wasn't successful. So, but I was certainly known in the county. So when I decided, that I wanted to run for surrogate, I had the complete support of my party, but we by that time had a Republican governor, Governor Pataki, and so he appointed someone in May, I guess. I applied for the appointment. Not that I thought I would get it, but I thought I can at least slow the process down. The less time he can be called judge, the better for my running against him. And it did slow it a little bit. I mean, I went up for the interview, and we went through the whole thing, and I filled out all the long forms and everything. But, of course, he got it. And actually turned out to be very good at it, I understand. But I was successful in defeating him. So.
Thank you. Was gender an issue, pro or con, in your race for family court?
Well, the family court is when I ran, certainly for the appointment, you never know, but on the appointment, but two of us were rated highly qualified by our local bar association. David Clegg was the other one, and he certainly was a fine person, and he would have been a fine judge. I've always thought that, that probably what tilted it towards me was my gender. And it's interesting because I talked to him very recently at my retirement party, and he went on. He's a very good lawyer, but he decided to go to divinity school at Yale, and he became a minister. And he said to me, we both ended up in the right places, because that probably wouldn't have happened had he become a judge. But there, I think, and as far as running, I don't know. I mean, I don't think people voted for me just because I was a woman, but I certainly don't think that I lost for it either. I mean, lost votes for it. So,
thank you. And so why did you decide to ultimately run for surrogates court in 2005?
Well, I think I've kind of explained that. And that's the reasons that I wanted, both because I had been there for 15 years in the family court, as I said, as a grueling. And it was just wearing me down. I wanted to be as good a judge as I could, and I think I was good at it. And as I said, I think it was the most important position that I ever filled in my life. But you had to be all there for it, and I was just sort of ready to do something different. And I actually continued, because they didn't put anyone in that position for a while. I continued going back to family court for some part of the year, and then they appointed someone to fill the vacancy, and I immediately went into doing Supreme Court, acting Supreme Court. So there's never a time, if I have any regrets, if that's a question, it's that I never got to be the full-time surrogate all the time, but I always was doing something else too. So,
thank you. So after 15 years, after you first ran for public office, how had the dynamics changed for women, or had
this is a very hard question, because certainly what we've just seen in our recent election, I mean, it hasn't improved for women everywhere. In Ulster County, because I had done it for so long, it was known, and I don't know, and it had become, we had another, the person that followed Judge Peters was a woman, Judge Mizell, who's still there, so there had been, they had kind of accepted it, but, that's misleading, because I think Ulster County is unusual in that respect. Ulster County is an incredibly open kind of place. It isn't just because of Woodstock and New Paltz, but we do have those liberal areas open to
In other places?
Yeah, more progressive. It is. I mean, if you look at the results of this election, we're the only county that went for Hillary Clinton. All the surrounding counties voted for the contiguous counties voted for Donald Trump. So we are unusual. I mean, it wasn't just the courts. I mean, when I worked for the DSS, I worked for Tom Roach, who was, and everyone said he'll never hire a Democrat. Well, he did. He was a Republican. He was Mr. Republican. He did, and he cared so much about kids. He was a great commissioner of social services, and it just is. It's a great place. I just fell on my feet. We moved there in part because we had a weekend house, but it was a good place to be. I don't think that's why I don't want to be misleading and all Pollyannish about how lovely it was for me, because it's not been for women elsewhere, and they've really felt it. And so I was sort of in an unusual place, and a lot of credit has to go to Karen Peters, because she was the first, and she turned out to be really good at it. I mean, what may get lost in all of this is how good a family court judge she was. I mean, she's doing a whole lot of other things now, but she was an outstanding trial judge. And that word gets out, so that helps. So I don't know. I suppose it had changed because all over there are more women, but I think that I know that there's a big struggle in a lot of places for women still in this state. So,
no, thank you, Judge. It appears to be that surrogate court, at least in this region, is where women have made the most gains, as you were saying, Judge. At the moment, about 67% of the surrogates in a 3rd Judicial District are women, and 60% of the family court judges are female. Why did you gravitate to this area? You mentioned you had a weekend home, but I'm guessing it wasn't because of an environment that was more friendly towards women that made you and your family move here.
No. Well, I mean, first of all, your figure on, and it's right but we have 7 counties in the 3rd Judicial District. Only 3 of them elect surrogates separately. The others all have 2 or 3 hatters. So there are lots of men that are doing surrogate work in our district. It just so happens that Ulster County, Rensselaer County, and Ulster County are the 3. And so right now, 2/3 of our surrogates are women. I think if you really wanted to look for evidence for that position, you'd look in New York City, where they've had women surrogates for a long time. So just starting with the surrogates court, I mean, it would have to be, somewhat, it's obviously speculation. I was told that I might have a hard time running for surrogate in Ulster County because it was considered a man's job because you deal with money and all these, complicated estates, and that might be an issue. And I wish I could hear Kate Doyle's, but Kate Doyle had a lot of background in surrogates court before she became a surrogate. So I think that some women, I mean, I remember when I got out of law school that women were encouraged to go into estate work because it was less time consuming and they had to balance it with families. And I think we can never forget about women is that they're balancing so often children. And so I think that might have been, and so therefore if you start out there, you may be more apt to go into it. As for the family court, I mean, there were always a lot of family women, but in New York City, the mayor appoints the judges. So
yes.
There were a number of them when I was not in the Bronx, so it didn't seem to me. Judy Scheinlin was there. Judge Judy was a judge when I was first started practicing.
Interesting.
It should be interesting to have it in New York County. But so I don't know whether women get into that for the same reason, because it's a less demanding time, or whether it's hard to know why it is that that's been, and because some people think, well, that's more of like a women's job because it's because there are children involved and they want to and they think that would be good to have.
And how would you counter? You mentioned that some people would discourage women to go into surrogates because it's dealing with money and finances. To me, it gives the perception that women
are not.
Are not.
Right,
exactly.
I know. I mean, there's a lot of.
So how would you respond to that question?
Yeah, I don't know that anybody certainly ever asked it that way.
Well, maybe not.
Or that a whole idea.
But implicitly, they.
Oh, I know. I mean, there are a lot of. I mean, there's also implicit. There are a lot of stereotypes, gender stereotypes on both sides. That that women are going to be more sensitive. That women are better communicators. Therefore, they belong in the family court. Well, it depends. I mean, there are men. You don't get to be a judge, frankly, if you're not a good communicator. And so, there male judges are that way, and then there are women who become CPAs, and lots of them, and are good at finances. So I just think that any of those, and I think to the extent that they work against men, that in something like the family court, where it's to me, the most interesting, and I'd never done it, it's the area that I know the least about. Every once in a while they call me to arraign someone, but I don't really know. I have no experience in criminal law, and I know that the governor appointed a woman to be the county court judge, and she was a Democrat, and she lost, and I in the election, and I think that part of that was that this stereotype that you need this tough guy to be a criminal county judge, criminal court judge. That's one place where I really saw it, because she was smart and she was good, and she did a good job, but she lost and in the general election, and so I think that's probably still a. I mean, and there were what they used on that was, soft on crime, and she's just a woman, and she's soft on. She was very concerned about civil rights, I think, it would be, and I think that's. And she ran against someone who's now our county court judge, who was like Mr. Law and Order, and it probably had been the assistant DA, and that's another way that, or had been the DA, I guess. I mean, that's another way that people get into county court is that they are DAs. And then they seem to be logical to be the judge, So that's one. It was disappointing what happened there.
But that could be a challenge too for a woman,
right?
To get. She may work as an attorney in the district attorney's office,
and they do.
But would she be the DA?
That's right. Would she get there?
Exactly.
And actually, I did when I first got out of law school. I wanted to be legal service, but I looked at other places, and I applied to the Brooklyn DA, and I got the first interview, and they called me back for the second interview, and I thought to myself, yes, I don't really want to be a DA. I mean, that's when it was really clear to me that was not what I wanted to do with my legal career, was go into criminal law, and so I didn't. But a lot of women have, and they become DAs, but not in Ulster County. That's the one position.
Because you've mentioned how progressive.
Right, but we've never had, they've never had a woman district attorney, ADAs, yes, and we've never had a woman county. That's the one position that's still open, is the county court, and it is, and that's where I think this whole law and order thing is.
Thank you, Judge. Can you speak to the impact of the major trailblazers, people like Judith Kay, Karen Peters, that you've mentioned?
Yes. Well, I mean, first let me just, I've talked a lot about Karen. Let me just talk about Judge Kay. Judge Kay, I remember, used this expression, I'm sure it came from her, about the sense that people had spoken to her about the sense of inclusion and inspiration that she provided. It was a wonderful phrase, because that's both. It's the sense of inclusion that you get from seeing somebody who's she was on the Court of Appeals before she was the presiding judge. But all that time, and most of the time that I've been a judge, she was up there, until she was forced to retire. So certainly having her there. She was also, Judge Kay was incredibly approachable. You could talk to her, and she always, she always knew who I was. I mean, she remembered everybody's names. She was always, after I finalized an adoption between two men of a developmentally disabled child, they had done a super job as foster parents for this kid. And I wrote her a letter about it. And I said, this never would have happened but for you. And I can remember that summer when that case on adoption by same-sex couples was, and also unmarried couples, was before the court, and it went on, and we were very slow in rendering a decision, and we all were sort of imagining Judge Kay up there like pulling people's arms and but anyway, so I wrote her that and told her about it. It was a wonderful story, because this little boy, they were telling me, he was in kindergarten, they said they want to stop giving him special services because he's so, and they were so proud because he really didn't need them anymore. But I said, well, just keep whatever they'll give you, take it, because it's really, but it was just an inspiring story. So I wrote her that, and quick as in handwriting, I got back a note from her. She always did. I wrote her more than once, and I always got an answer from her. So that's for certainly Judge Kay, and whatever meeting you went to, she was there. She was always open and gracious, and it can be done. She had 3 kids. That was another thing. She did it with 3 kids. And Karen Peters, I think I've spoken a lot about her. I mean, she was just an inspiration, and still is, and really helps women along, in terms of hiring, and you can just see. I mean, she's been a huge inspiration, I would say.
So. Women are multitaskers. We are. So I'm guessing they did change the landscape for women and their achievements.
Right. Yes, I think they did change. Yes,
certainly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. That Judge Peters did. I mean, that she had the energy, and when she ran, I mean, the stories about when I was barely conscious of it because we just moved up, but that she wasn't expected to win. She ran against the law clerk of I think the other judge, Judge Feeney's law clerk, who was also applied for the vacancy. And she was not, but this is one way that women have succeeded in the early going on this, is that in the story is that she just worked she worked very, very hard, and he kind of didn't. He took it easy. He thought he was, and she's just that energy that you saw when she when you see whenever Karen was just devoted to that, and she went to every event and met everyone and got up at 5 a.m. and went to when the factory, there was a factory that closes, she would be there to hand out her things. So there's no doubt about it. I think rather than, I think breaking trail in the snow is probably a good good way to put it, because that's tougher than just she did that, and for a lot of women, and and just for every woman who comes into that court, especially in those early years, and there's a woman judge. It gives you a sense of inspiration and inclusion, in the words of Judge Gay.
Yes, inclusion. Yes. And what would you say to the next generation about their responsibility, if you think they have one, to carry the torch further? So the young women, and men too, and men. Right.
Well, certainly not to lose ground. I mean, and for the first time, we're having to think about that. Not to let it, not to lose ground. Not to. One of the things that I always tell women, I didn't practice law for a few years, but 5 years when my kids were really little, and I thought I was never going to be a lawyer again, let alone a judge. Your path may not be exactly the same as a male's, but you can have it and you can make it, and you need to, and you're just going to have to work very hard if that's what you want. And of course, a lot of women who are lawyers and a lot of women judges don't have children and choose that path. But for those who do, it's certainly doable, and we've seen it done. And yes, not to. I think the generation of women coming up that are coming out of law school right now, I mean, they have their work cut out for them in the next 4 years. I mean, there's just a retrenchment on all the things that women have fought for so long going on, and so they've got to. But they have a lot of people that went before them and a lot of people to talk to. But certainly, to them, I would say, that you got to be out there, and even if you're not running for judge, whatever, you've got to be active on the women's issues.
Organize.
My great niece, she's in her 20s. She took a semester off from Fordham to go to North Carolina to work for Hillary Clinton, and of course was absolutely devastated. But during the Women's March, or after the Women's March, she tweeted and she said, "This is all great, but she said, you've all got to get clipboards and pens and go out there door to door." I thought, I hope she goes to law school. But
the trenches, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So.
And you mentioned, Judge, and I don't think it's personal, but it piqued my attention about there was a moment of maybe 4 or 5 years where you didn't think you would.
Absolutely.
Can you share, if you don't mind?
No. Well, I won my. It was when my middle one was 2, I guess, and I was just having a rough time doing all of it, and we wanted to have a third child, which we did, and so when I was in New York City, my friends would call from that I knew from the law, and they'd say, "Well, we got this job. When are you come back? When are you soon? I'm going to come back," and. But then we decided, when this took over, was when we moved up here, and there were a lot of reasons to move up here, and which I won't go into, but I was not really enthusiastic about it. I love the city. And I thought to myself, you're going to go up there. You never. I really did. I thought I'm never going to be a lawyer again, let alone, I mean, so that's what I tell some women, because you don't give up. So we got up here, and I had one friend who I'd known from legal services, and she would come to, I don't know if you want this on the way, she would come to dinner and say to me, Mary, when are you going to open an office here? Because I didn't open it immediately. She said, when are you going to open an office? And she'd say, Vic, order her some stationery. I remember this so clearly. Anyway, she helped me enormously, and that was another woman, Andrea, who helped me, get started. Mm-hmm. And then I went into family court, and that's where I got going. But I can remember that feeling that, just because I stopped working, that I wasn't going to be able to get back to it. And I got back to it much easier than I thought. And I do think Andrea Moran was the person, and I should mention her because she really did. She was the one who would she had a practice, and she had moved up from legal services because her husband was teaching at SUNY New Paltz. He got a job there. So she was already here and had an office. But so she was a person that helped me at that very early stage. But yes, and so, women do. The women don't take necessarily the straightest paths to where they get.
No, we don't.
And I was interested, I read up before I came about Judge Kay that apparently there was a period that she worked, she was really not practicing law. She was assisting the dean when her kids were really young. And there are just times that other responsibilities take over. So.
We're multifaceted, which I think gives us our strength.
But you talked about stereotypes, and boy, do I remember.
Right.
When and you were before me by a little, graduated from law school, didn't you feel that you were steered towards certain, like the family court, although I know you loved that, and maybe you went there on your own. I know many of us felt like we were being steered in certain directions and steered away from other fields.
I think I felt, well, because I really wanted to work in legal services, and and there was, and I didn't feel steered towards that. That was what I went into law school wanting to do. So I didn't feel steered. Family court, I had a kind of an interesting start because when I was interviewed for that job up in legal services, they said to me, I remember this, and I got to know him well, one of the attorneys on the panel said to me, he said, well, about family court, he said, if you were asked to represent a woman who said that, if you got her off, she was going to beat her child and just keep beating her child, would you represent her? And I said, this is a ridiculous question. Nobody's going to say that, number one, and I know this is so to prove that I'm going to defend anybody. And I said, no. I said, I wouldn't take the case. He said, well, you better not work in the family court. So then, of course, and so I ended up working in the family court. Nobody ever said that to me. And, it was never an issue for me defending people accused of this. But because you can, well, anyway. So, no, but that's because the peculiar way, maybe the unusual way that I decided to go to law school.
But you were asked a question that I'm not sure a man would have been asked. Were you asked questions in the interview process that you think you might have been asked because you were a woman?
It's interesting. I never thought about whether it wouldn't be asking a woman because of a man, because those were the kinds of questions in the criminal area. I mean, I thought he was treating it like criminal law, that you have to be tough enough, right. And it may have been. You have to be tough enough to not care whether the person you represent is going to go out and murder 5 more people. And so that was kind of the impression I got from that question, and it really annoyed me. I mean, it just angered me because I just thought it was a stupid question, but I didn't really think of it as being sexist, but you may be right. I mean, maybe he was thinking I wasn't tough enough. And I certainly didn't. I knew what the right answer was. Oh, of course, I would represent her to the hilt. I wasn't going to say that. That was ridiculous. That might have been. Rachel, you have more perception than I had at the time or ever since, but I remember it well.
No, I've just become sensitive.
Well, because you work in a criminal,
to these types of questions, having had a few in my own.
I'm sure you have. Yeah.
I can't. Oh, did you have any women professors at NYU? I mean, full professors?
No, I did not have any. I did not have any women professors, certainly that made any impression at all. And I don't think if I went back and checked it, I would find that I had any. Yeah. And not all that many in college either. I went to a co-ed. At the University of Pennsylvania. It was not. So, no. And not any memorable ones even in college. Which is an interesting point. To the extent that there was encouragement, it was from male professors. And I'm sure that's changed academically.